melt is when I'm ocean wave.
Today on Nova Legends and Virginia Legends podcast, I have Justin Counts, who was a star catcher at UVA a little bit after I was there. Justin's a young man. And also, most recently, he took the Madison High School Warhawks football team to the state finals, won the Northern Region again. Coach, thanks for doing this.
Of course, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. So, I started this this podcast series, me and some other guys during the lockdown. We were talking about mostly the old basketball days. So we had most of the old players, coaches, and some fans on the group. And then I started doing a little bit of football as well. And as you know, I talked to Coach Bendorf, Mark Bendorf, and I haven't been following football closely over the years. But one thing I have to say, it's really changed a lot, and I'm excited to get into that. But let me introduce you your broad sketches of your career, and you can fill me in on things that I missed. Sure. I know you played at Marshall, and I know there were some big time players. I think a couple played in the NFL from around your time period as well. We can talk about that. I know you're a baseball player in Marshall as well. Played baseball at UVA. I think you're class of 95 or 96.
Yes, 96.
96. You've coached baseball and football at Madison for many years. I know your wife also is a lacrosse coach.
Yes.
There as well. And I know you became head coach at Madison after the unfortunate car accident of Lenny Schultz, who'd been coaching there 5 or 6 years and had some success as well. Mm-hmm. And you've been able to carry on lots of his success and done a tremendous job at Madison. Did I get some of the broad sketches there right, Coach?
Yeah, absolutely right. I did. I attended Marshall High School, graduated in 1992. I played football there for Coach Mike Skinner and Dean Sisler, two guys who are extremely influential for me. I went on, I played baseball at University of Virginia, graduated in 1996. We won an ACC championship there, so I was very proud of being a part of that team. And then I started coaching baseball at Madison High School in 2000. One of the assistant coaches when I was at Marshall, Mark Jorman, we call him Pudge, he took the job at Madison, and he asked me to come help him there. And Coach Sisler had retired from Marshall at the time. So I've been with him ever since that time. And then when Lenny Schultz took over the head football job at Madison, I joined the staff there. So that was about 2010 probably. And I was on the staff. And then when Lenny passed away, really we were looking for somebody who was within the program, who could step up and kind of carry on the things that he had put in place and the vision that he had for the program. And my wife encouraged me to step up and do that. And it allowed us to keep all the other coaches in place and kind of keep some continuity for the kids. Obviously, it was a terrible situation for the whole school and everybody was devastated, but we thought if we could keep it as smooth a transition as possible for the kids, it'd be the best. So I talked to the other coaches there and said I'd be willing to do that, and they encouraged me to do that. So we've been there ever since, and we've been able to, like I said, keep the core group of the coaching staff together and keep kind of moving forward on the vision that Lenny had for Madison football.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you mentioned briefly your Marshall coaches. I may have gotten their names wrong, but what are some of the things you learned from your Marshall days? Now, and I know coaching baseball is probably being a baseball manager, I guess we call it, is radically different than being a football coach. But why don't you talk a little bit about your high school days and your coaches there and what you learned from them?
Yeah, well, like I said, I thought those two men, Mike Skinner and Dean Sisler, were two of the most influential people in my life, particularly at that time, along with my parents, obviously. And I think what I learned the most there was kind of the importance of hard work and the importance of being a part of something that was a little bigger than yourself, and kind of setting goals. And we had a lot of success there. But we also experienced some failures, and they helped me kind of deal with some of those things. And it was more of a kind of a time for personal growth for me. And I felt like I owed a lot of my success in baseball into kind of the attitude that they kind of instilled in me, and kind of the work ethic and the competitiveness. So I thought, when I had an opportunity to coach in high school, that was kind of the thing that I wanted to be able to bring to the kids, to have somebody who kind of helped them navigate kind of your teenage years and kind of get a vision for what you wanted to accomplish kind of moving forward. And I thought those guys did a great job of instilling that in me.
Right. Well, Coach, are you also the head baseball coach at Madison? Or are you
No, I'm an assistant coach. Yeah.
Now, when you think about baseball and football, obviously you've had a lot of success in football, and to me, coaching football is a very complicated thing because you have 22 starters. Some of those can start both ways, but you have special teams, you have huge staffs. It's a major undertaking. The baseball is not quite as big. Basketball is much more manageable. Do you think you've been satisfied if you've never been a head football coach and you were a head baseball coach instead?
That's a great question. Being a head football coach was never a goal of mine. It wasn't something that I was hoping to do. I was very satisfied being an assistant coach in baseball. I have a great relationship with Coach Jorman there, and he lets me coach, and you don't have to deal with some of the other things that come along with being a head coach, kind of on the administrative side. Yeah, well, I mean, that's just part of it. There's a lot of things that go into being a head coach beyond just coaching the players. And I was really satisfied with doing those roles in both of those cases. But I think having the opportunity to be a head coach, when I was a position coach in football, I dealt with my 10 or 12 or 15 guys, and that's who I worked with on a day in and day out basis. Those were the relationships that I formed, and those were the kids that I hoped that I impacted. As the head coach, I'm touching 100, 120 kids there. I got to know about them, how they're doing in school, how things are going. So I may not get as much kind of hands-on football coaching. I feel like I've got a much more greater sense of who the kids are in the program and how their lives are going and how things are working for them and how they feel like they're contributing to the program. So I think there's some things to gain from being a head coach that you don't get from being a position coach. And I wouldn't trade those experiences that I've had as being a head coach, though it wasn't something that I was necessarily seeking out.
Yeah. Are the skill sets basically the same? Could a great baseball coach be a great football coach? Is it the same, or is it a little bit different? Because obviously, the tactics, the skills are different, but I mean, those are things that all can be learned, and it comes down to leadership.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think being an assistant coach or a coach, a position coach or something, requires a lot more kind of hands-on knowledge of the skills and things that you have to do. I feel like a head coach is a lot more of managing people and kind of making sure that everybody's working towards the same goal, that people aren't getting disgruntled, that people's feelings are being heard, and it's managing your coaches and making sure that everybody understands their assignments. They feel like they're contributing to the team and that roles are specified. Obviously there's some scheduling aspects or some administrative aspects, but I feel like a successful coach can coach different sports. You don't necessarily have to have the sports background in such detail, or even the detail that you would to be a position coach. I think, it's more about, like I said, managing the people and making sure that people feel that they're a part of it and that everybody understands what the goal is and the vision is of the overall program.
Yeah. So my kids go to Yorktown, and so I haven't gone to many football games high school football games over the years. I went to all of them when I was in the 80s and before.
Right.
So I saw the Yorktown Madison game over there in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a very much old school playoff game. That game right there could have been played when I was going to school.
Right.
I mean, it was 3 yards in a cloud of dust, two teams that were committed to the ground game. I mean, both teams had very talented wide receivers and quarterbacks, but it was very much an old school football game. But one of the things that got me intrigued with football is I started seeing these crazy scores this year. I mean, obviously there was the Freedom game when they scored 112 points. I never heard anything like that. Right. But then I realized most of the games this year are blowouts, and not just blowouts. They're like 48-0, 58-3, 65-0. That's a 24-0 game was a close game these days. Right. In fact, when I played football, that was 24-0 was a blowout. That was a big loss.
Right.
How has football changed so much over the years?
Well, I think that particularly on the high school level, spreading out the formations and creating matchups that are difficult. I think people are more adept at throwing the ball than they were. And I think coaches have a much greater understanding of the passing game than probably they did when I played. So I think that just the ability to create matchups where you've got one-on-ones that are just tough for people to cover, and then being able to exploit that, and then you're making people tackle in space. It just lends itself to these higher scores. I mean, I think one of the things that we try to do to offset that is, like you described, we try to control the ball. We try to take time off the clock, because I don't know that we necessarily have the athletes all the time to be able to take advantage of some of those matchups. So we do it a little bit different. But I mean, obviously people have things and core concepts that they hang their hats on. And I think that it's just more prolific for people to throw the ball around, and that lends itself, if you've got athletic mismatches, lends yourself to scores that get out of hand.
Do you think being a coach is more fun now because it's more innovative now, or do you think it's because, again, now when I went to Robinson, Coach Henry, who made his name at Marshall, well, he made his name at a lot of places, but obviously you know all about Coach Henry. We ran a wing tee, and we ran the waggle out of the wing tee. Every play looked the same, and we were very tough to stop. But we thought we were not fancy, but we thought we were innovative the way we ran the wing tee. Do you think it's just as fun to coach now as it was then, or
I do, and I think what's interesting is that a lot of those same concepts, we also ran the wing tee at Marshall, and a lot of those same concepts from the wing tee blocking and things are still happening in some of these spread offenses. You're just taking advantage now, I think, more so of athletes being in space and making the defense cover more area. Whereas, when we played, it was more of, like you said, every play looks the same and you're tricking people in some regard. I think there's still some of that, but it's more of make them defend the whole field, put pressure on them in a lot of places, have answers for different things that people do to counter kind of the way you spread people out. And so I do think that there are some innovations, but a lot of it still goes back, has its roots in some of that old school football that you and I used to watch or play growing up.
Yeah. Well, one thing that Coach Bendorf said about Coach Henry was, I believe, a history teacher. And near the end of Coach Bendorf's career, and for those who don't know, Coach Bendorf won the state championship at Robinson, I think, at least 2 years, but he was at other schools as well. He said it became very hard for a teacher to also coach football, because he said he was beginning to spend 60 to 80 hours a week on this football. I might have got the numbers wrong, but it was a lot.
Right.
And it wasn't like that for Coach Henry. Coach Henry coached baseball. I mean, like you do, he was able to do other sports. And I think he might have even been involved in swimming. I know his wife was. But anyway, are the coaches these days having to spend more and more time because the game is getting more complicated?
Well, I think that there are some things that save time, and we have, ability to watch film a lot easier than coaches did in the past. I mean, I could take my computer, I have it on my phone, I can watch film, while I'm supposed to be watching my kids do, one of their games or something. I can do that. So I think from that regard, there's easier ways. You don't have to lock yourself in a room and roll the projector over and over and over to watch film and do that type of thing. But I do think that there are maybe more concepts or things that you've got to, bring yourself up to speed. I don't know. I think that, I think as far as the preparation and getting ready for practice and doing those things are probably the same amount of hours. I think that there's always going to be a certain amount of time that you're going to have to spend preparing yourself. Football probably more so than any other sport that I've been involved with, because of the amount of film watching and the things that you've got to do. But I do think that there are ways to make that easier and streamlined. But I still think that there is going to be that, extra amount of time that you have to spend to prepare for a football game.
Yeah. Well, also, Coach Cox, coach of Battlefield, star quarterback at Annandale for many years, great dude. He says that football is a safer game now because he says that the techniques are better, and he actually thinks football is a safer game. But there is a school of thought. The players are bigger and faster. The collisions are at a higher pace than it was when we played, especially when I played. What are your thoughts about what safety is the game safer or more dangerous now than it was 30, 40 years ago?
Yeah, I think the game's probably the same. I think where we've made great strides as coaches and as a football community is how we prepare in practice. I think, when you and I were growing up, we would hit every single day. There were a lot of drills, a lot of collisions in practice a lot of that has been eliminated from our everyday practice. for us at Madison, during the season, we have 2 days where we wear helmets and we wear full equipment for 2 days of practice. The other days are more, film work or study or walkthrough kind of stuff. We don't really ever tackle all the way to the ground. It's wrap, and we do a lot of work on technique, and we do a lot of what I'd call teaching tackling and those types of things, blocking, but it's not the full-on collisions. It's not the Oklahoma drills. It's not a lot of the stuff that, you and I grew up on doing. And there is still a place for that. You've got to teach that. And obviously you can't just go from having no contact in practice to playing a full football game. You've got to kind of build yourself up. But I think as coaches, there's a lot more education out there. There's a lot more understanding of where we can eliminate some of the unnecessary collisions and kind of make the sport as a whole safer. And I think, frankly, for us, I know at Madison, we're very cognizant of the fact that we can't afford to have certain kids injured during the season. I mean, there's valuable kids that we just don't have the depth necessarily to replace if somebody like that goes out. So we try to eliminate kids playing both ways. We try to really develop as many kids as we can. And we try to really spend a lot of time teaching to eliminate kind of what I would call unnecessary injuries or practice injuries. But obviously the game is going to be physical. It's a physical game. There's going to be injuries that occur, but I think we've done a much better job of eliminating kind of the unnecessary stuff that used to be involved with football.
Yeah. Well, one thing about Madison, and I think the same could probably be said for Freedom. You guys are closely aligned with the youth program. I mean, even when I played, the Vienna youth football, it was great. And I actually think Vienna baseball and Madison baseball have the same alignment. So you always had a great feeder program, even 40 years ago. And I went to Robinson. We really didn't. Braddock Road was, we'd have kids from 4 or 5 different high schools, like Robinson, West Springfield, Lake Braddock. They were all Woodson. They were all Braddock Road kids. And so there was never any close alignment with that. How important do you think that is to a program to kind of have that alignment and to have a youth program kind of feeds into a high school program?
Yeah, I think it's a huge advantage for us. I really do. I think, VYI has fantastic coaches. So you talk about the understanding how to do blocking and tackling and those types of things. We get, so typically for us, we get probably 50 or 60 kids that come out for the freshman football. And of that, I would say 60% of them have played football before coming up. So there's a core group of kids who understand the fundamentals of football. And that allows us to spend some time with the kids who haven't, and we can kind of bring them up to speed, but we don't have to coach a group of 60 kids on how you put your shoulder pads on and how you put your helmet on and the basics, what's a stance and, starting from zero. So the fact that we've got those kids that have already played, like you said, Vienna's teams are historically very successful. So they understand kind of what goes into a winning program, the dedication to practice, the commitment that has to be there. So I think our families kind of have an idea of what to expect when they get to high school. So it certainly makes my job easier on kind of an education or getting the families up to speed to what high school football is all about. But again, we do have a core group of kids who are fundamentally sound, who understand football and can help teach their friends, and then also convince other kids that football is a great thing to do. And they come out, and we get a lot of kids that play multiple sports because we get kind of that synergy between the youth programs and the kids playing basketball or baseball or lacrosse in Vienna, and then they kind of convince their buddies to come on out and try football.
Yeah, one advantage you guys had many years ago is Vienna had like nationally known higher weight class team. I think it was 145 or something like that. It was, and they had won so many games in a row. And one thing that happens in youth football is your bigger kids don't get a chance. It's age for age. Right. So a lot of times it's the little guys like me. I was a really good youth player, but I never really grew that much in high school. And so it's, we kind of can dominate, and because it's weight for age. And a lot of the bigger guys don't really play a lot of youth football because they have to play against much older kids. Right. And at least at Vienna, you had great coaching at that higher weight class. Does that still exist to this day?
It is. We have great, I mean, frankly, they have great coaching kind of all the way through all the levels. But, and the Fairfax County Youth League has made some adjustments to accommodate some of the bigger kids, because that was one of the issues is, the bigger, younger kids were having a tough time finding a place to be able to play. And it's hard for a 10-year-old who's big to play with 13 or 14-year-old kids, because the maturity level is different, and it's an uncomfortable position sometimes for them to do that. So they've made adjustments there. I think there are some other areas around Northern Virginia where they are strictly age-based now, and I think that is also has some advantages and disadvantages as well. It kind of discourages some of the smaller kids who haven't grown earlier to play, because it's difficult to play. So I think there's pros and cons to both ways. I think the bottom line for us at Madison is that like I said, we get kids who have played, they've been well coached, they understand how to play, and it is certainly an advantage for us as they come into the school.
And do you see long-term a combination of flag football and contact football? Or do you think one day it'll be mostly flag?
Well, I know, speaking for Vienna, they've done a great job of kind of incorporating both. They've got a real successful flag program. They've got a real successful tackle program. The commissioners control both of those. So the advertisements for both leagues are going out. I think they get great participation. I think flag football is a great way to get kids introduced. It's a great way to kind of introduce some of the basic concepts and get people past some of the stereotypes and get them exposed to the coaches who also coach flag and can kind of demonstrate some of the pros and cons. So I do think it's important for kids to play both. And I think flag is a way to get some kids involved whose parents may not want them to start at such a young age, but they can still get involved in football. So I think there's certainly a place for both of those moving forward.
Yeah. Well, Coach, let's go back briefly to your Marshall days. Was I right? There was a couple of one might have been a baseball player, but I think you had a pro football player around your time at Marshall.
Yeah. So there was several pro athletes in my time. Pete Shirk was a baseball player. Yeah. He was a couple years older than me. He had a real successful career in the major leagues. Keith Lyle was a football player. He was 2 years older than me. He played at University of Virginia, then played for the Rams and the Redskins a long time. McCrary played for the Ravens, won a Super Bowl there, and for the Seattle Seahawks. And then Nick Sorensen was a little bit younger than me, but he played in the league for quite a few years and still coaches now in the NFL. So Marshall had a good run there of that was probably over an 8-year span of 4 significant professional athletes.
Yeah. And you're at a very interesting time demographically, because Marshall was changing a lot. Marshall, in the 70s was blue collar. It had Pemmon Hills. They had a combination of everything. Right. And then you begin to get a lot of more foreigners there. So you had a lot of a lot of soccer participation and other types of sports. And then Marshall became more of an upscale neighborhood. It's interesting that Marshall has definitely transformed through the years, different types of demographics. Sure.
And I think you see that all throughout Northern Virginia. I think Madison's going through a little bit of the same thing. Kind of the old, 1950s, 1960s houses get torn down and they build up a nice big house, and you're getting younger families that move back in, but they might be, maybe not your typical blue collar families that were living there before. My father went to Marshall. He grew up in Pemmon Hills. My grandma lived there her whole life. So we spent a lot of time over there, and definitely, I certainly enjoyed my time at Marshall. I think when I was there, you had a real diverse population, both in ethnicity and in incomes, and it was just everybody kind of mixed in. And I felt like we had a real strong school spirit. There was great support for athletics, and I certainly had a great time. We had great coaches when I was there. It was just a really fun time to be at the school.
Right. Well, then you made the correct decision and went to the right school. You ended up going to University of Virginia. So why'd you decide to go to UVA, and were there other schools that you were closely considering as well?
So it was interesting. I didn't commit to going to the University of Virginia till really the district tournament of my senior year in high school. So it was really late commitment. I had some kind of lower opportunities to play baseball at the Division III level, and I had some opportunities to play football at the Division III level, and I was just hoping to kind of wait and see what happened. I actually got accepted to go to school there before I was recruited to play, and ended up just having a really good senior baseball season, and I happened to play really well when the coaches had come up to watch me play. And it was just one of those fortunate circumstances that everything kind of worked out. But so I did commit there, and I went there, and we weren't very good when I first got there. The program was kind of on a down place. We were one of the bottom teams in the ACC, and we just did a really good job of kind of grinding through and getting some good recruiting classes. And by the time I left my senior year, we had won the ACC tournament, and we made it to the regional. So it was really a great experience for me.
Who was your baseball coach at UVA?
Dennis Womack was the head coach when I was there.
And what did you learn from him that maybe things that you still use today with your football and your baseball teams?
Yeah, well, I think that the thing that got me the most there was, like I said, we weren't very good, and we had to endure some pretty tough seasons. And it's hard to kind of prepare yourself and grind when things aren't going the way that you expect them to go, and you're not seeing the results from the work that you're putting in. So I think for me, what I really got out of there was, having to have the buy-in of everybody on the team, kind of getting everybody involved, feeling a part of it, taking ownership of it. Coach Womack did a great job of allowing the players to kind of evolve as leaders and take leadership roles. And I think, like I said, we had some really good recruiting classes there that brought in some good talent, but we had to really work to kind of get out of that basement of the ACC. And obviously the ACC has some really good baseball schools, and that was a tough road for us to climb. But I think we made progression every year. And it was just one of those things that we felt like if we had dedicated ourselves completely and kind of bought in to everything that everybody was doing, that we had an opportunity to be successful. And I think for me, it just reaffirmed my belief in that, nothing that you're going to accomplish in this world is going to happen if you don't put the work in, if you don't dedicate yourself. And I think it allows me to kind of share that message with the younger guys that I'm coaching now, that, you just can't wish for good things to happen. Everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to win championships, but not everybody's willing to put the work in and the time in and the commitment and the sacrifice it takes to be great. And so I can kind of lean on some of my experiences personally and kind of to show these guys that, these things are possible, but you got to really put the time in, and you got to do it as a group. It's not going to be 5 or 6 guys. It's got to be a team involvement, a group involvement.
Were you paying attention to what George Welsh was doing with the UVA football team?
Of course. Yeah.
So did you, so as you weren't thinking about coaching football at the time, probably. So, I mean, were you a student of the game, or did you go to the game like the rest of the students, just had a good time and just kind of partied some?
Yeah. Well, I unfortunately I didn't party much. I was I probably, looking back, I maybe should have enjoyed myself a little bit more in college, but I was pretty dedicated to the baseball. And it's funny, I was better at baseball, but I always loved football. Football was kind of my first love. So I don't know that I necessarily watched the games like everybody else. I was probably more of a football nerd than most people were. I mean, I really tried to dive in and understand the game a little bit, even though I wasn't as good at football as I had hoped to be. It was always my love, and I just was better at baseball. So that's why I played baseball. But football was always in the back of my mind, to the point where I'd even considered trying to walk onto the football team after I was done with baseball. I had to go back to school to finish my degree, and I had another year there. And I was thinking I wanted to just go play and just see what it was all about, see if I could learn some stuff. I ended up having an opportunity to play some professional baseball, so I didn't do that. But that was something that I was even considering at the time. So I guess I would say my answer to that was I always paid attention to the football program there, and I always had a love for football, and I always was kind of trying to learn more about it, even when I wasn't playing.
Yeah. Well, your senior year, I believe, one of the football players, Symmion Willis,
Yes.
lost his job at quarterback and was playing baseball with you guys. And you guys, I think he was part of that magical run you guys had when you went to the NCAA tournament for the first time in, I believe, 10 years or so. Talk a little bit about that season.
Sure. So I'll talk about Symmion at first, because I think it really opened my eyes to really what a great athlete can accomplish if they really set their mind to doing stuff. So like you said, Symmion was our football quarterback, and he got injured, and Mike Groh took over for him and ended up having a great season and was leading our team. So when he went back, they were the same class. And at least the way Symmion told me, was Coach Welsh decided that they weren't going to have two senior quarterbacks, and Aaron Brooks was there. He was maybe a freshman at the time. And they said, Aaron's going to be the backup quarterback. So we're going to have a competition for the job, and whoever wins is going to be the quarterback. The other guy, we're hoping to move to wide receiver. So they asked Symmion if he would be willing to move to wide receiver. And he said he didn't really want to do that. And they were kind enough to let him keep his scholarship, but they allowed him to play baseball full time. So he got to spend the fall with us that year. And he had played the previous spring, and he hadn't played since high school. So there was obviously a huge jump between college baseball and high school baseball, and he struggled. But when he got that opportunity to play the entire fall and kind of practice and get into it every single day, it was almost like you could see him getting better by the day. And by the time the spring rolled around, he was our 5-hole hitter, our starting right fielder. And even during the season, you could see him just get better and better and better and better and better. And it really, like I said, it opened my eyes to when a really elite athlete has the opportunity to work on something day in and day out, and they dedicate themselves, how good they can make themselves and how quickly they can turn themselves into a really good player. And Symmion ended up signing a free agent contract. He played several years of professional baseball, and he was a great teammate. And I think he was a real addition to our team. He gave us a little bit of that kind of confident athletic swagger that maybe we were missing as a group because we hadn't been real successful, and the football team had some success. And he brought a little bit of that leadership to our group and let us kind of see what we were able to accomplish. And we had some guys who really made big jumps individually that allowed us to kind of take the whole team to another level. And it was really a great group of guys, but it was one of those situations like I described before, where everybody was kind of bought in. Didn't really matter what your role was on the team. Everybody kind of bought into what their role was, and their number one interest was the betterment of the team and the success of the team. And for us, to kind of overcome those hurdles of the previous couple of years and kind of break that kind of stigma of that Virginia wasn't a very good baseball program. I take a lot of pride in the fact that the program's become so strong, because I feel like we kind of laid the groundwork there for what could be done there. And I think the groups after us have really pushed the bar so much higher, but I think we at least showed, what could be accomplished there.
Yeah. What's interesting about you say about his athleticism, when I was a kid, baseball had a couple of generations of our best African-American athletes playing baseball. So when, I grew up with guys like, Dave Winfield, Reggie Jackson, guys that played, Ken Griffey, guys that played multiple sports were playing baseball. I went to a Nationals game this year. I'm not a huge baseball fan. I think there was one black African-American player. There was some from the islands that was playing baseball. So, we used to talk about how the game, baseball changed because of all these athletes. Has the game changed back because these athletes like Symmion Willis are not playing baseball anymore?
Well, no, I don't think so. Even World Series this year, there was not one American-born African-American player in the World Series. And baseball, and particularly baseball and travel baseball, has become so expensive, and it's just something that you have to do to kind of continue to find the competition to compete at those levels. It's priced out a lot of kids from being able to do that. And I think it's a shame, because I think, like you said, I think that, in the 80s and the 90s, there was a ton of African-American elite baseball players that, and it's just hard, I think, for kids to decide that this is something that I want to do when you turn on the TV and you don't see people that look like you playing, and it's not popular, and there's not fields to play. There's just I think Major League Baseball has recognized this fact and are trying to take steps toward making the game more affordable for lower income people and inner city kids. There's just not fields to play. And I don't know that that's necessarily, the reason that young black kids aren't playing. I think maybe, they're watching guys like LeBron James and they're thinking they want to play basketball, or they're watching these guys on the NFL and they want to play football, and baseball is probably the third choice. And I think there's so much kind of year-round playing of sports now that you got to eliminate something. And even if baseball was your third choice, but you're an elite athlete and that becomes the game that you're best at, you keep playing. But if you have to eliminate that when you're 10 or 11 years old, because someone tells you have to play another sport, 3/4 of the year or all year, you drop that sport that was maybe your third sport. So I think we're still seeing some effects of that. And I'm hoping that that Major League Baseball takes steps to change that. But I do think that, year in and year out, the number of African-American kids that are playing baseball has dropped significantly. And it's a shame because, like you said, that you think about some of those guys, Ken Griffey Jr., Willie Mays, some of the greatest athletes that have ever played baseball. And we're just missing out on some of those guys.
Yeah, it's too bad. Well, Coach, you said you were able to chase your pro baseball dream for a while. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your pro career?
Well, I played 1 year in the Frontier League, which is I guess it's a non-affiliated professional league. They pay you, but you're not affiliated with a major league club. And then I finished up in the New York Yankees minor league system. I got released from them, but we talk about Symmion Willis and how, as an athlete, he progressed and got better every day. I feel like I pushed my body and the athleticism that I had about as far as I could push it. And I just think that you run into a situation where, hard work and dedication to something is only going to take you so far. You have to have a certain level of athleticism to get to those higher levels. And I think, and I'll tell you just a quick story. When I was in minor league training camp, we would break down by position, and I was a catcher, and we had a group of probably 6 or 7 minor league catchers there, one from, the AAA, AA, and a couple of single A teams. And there were a couple of kids there. I was 21 years old, I guess. I just finished college. And there were 2 kids there who were comparable players to me, but they were 16 years old. They had been signed out of the Dominican or Colombia or Venezuela or one of those countries there. And they had already played they were probably 17 at the time. They played a full season of minor league baseball. They were 17 years old, and they were, comparable to me with 4 more years of professional baseball to play to be my age. So it was just a situation where I feel like I pushed my body and I got as much out of it as I could possibly get. I have no regrets of anything. And that, I think, is, to me, just gives me peace about it. A lot of people say, I wish I had this chance. I think I got to do everything that I was capable of doing in baseball. And frankly, I really haven't picked up a ball or glove other than to coach since I've finished. I mean, it was just like, I did that. I completed that. I got the most out of it that I thought I could with my talent. And I have absolutely no regrets.
No adult softball for Coach Counts.
Well, yeah. So I played some adult softball, but that's a different game. That's more my speed.
Yeah, that's right. We can still have a beard and play some softball.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Well, Coach, you talked a little bit about becoming an assistant coach and that progression. But I understand you were great. You were a wizard at being up in the press box and kind of reading the game from up in the press box. And then, when you became a head coach, you came down the field and you had to coach like a head coach would
Right.
do it. Why don't you talk about a little bit of the transition from the press box and being able to see the game to being down in the trenches with the players and the other coaches?
Sure. Well, I think from the press box, I think that was one of my role there. I would help both the offense and defense coordinators kind of be able to see, and they had certain things that they would want me to look at during the game to tell them and help them make their adjustments and make their calls. So I had a pretty good idea, at least a baseline of what we were doing both offensively and defensively. So I think that helped the transition for me from being an assistant coach to being the head coach. Is I had a general idea of what we did on all 3 phases of the game. So I didn't have to kind of teach myself a different part once I did that. And, being a head coach, it's funny, the first time I was out there and there was a situation where we had to decide if we were going to go for it or punt, and everybody's kind of looking at me like, what are we going to do? And I'm thinking, I've never had to do this before. So there are some things that, just kind of flow of the game things. And I, I could talk to both coordinators and I think I have a really good relationship with both of our coordinators that we can have kind of those, emotional discussions on the sidelines and everybody understands what's going on and what we're trying to accomplish. So I think from that point, I think one of the things that I learned, you talked about my days at Marshall and then kind of being an assistant coach for the baseball team at Madison, is that, one of the keys to being a successful head coach is hiring or having great assistant coaches and letting them coach, letting them do their work. Don't micromanage everything that they do. So I feel very blessed that I had those guys in place. on the staff, and I frankly, I've learned a lot of football from those guys. But I do kind of let them coach and let them and obviously I have some suggestions and I have things that I would like to do. And, my name is on the team at the end of the day, but I let those guys do what they do best. And they're great football coaches. And I think that's something that young coaches, if I was going to give a young coach some advice, it's sometimes you've got to kind of swallow your ego and kind of let other guys and their personalities coach their units and do those things. And you can coach everybody, and you have an opportunity to kind of spread your message and what you want, the core values of your program to be. And that's your job as a head coach to establish that and hammer that home and make sure everybody's adhering to that. But you got to let your guys have their personalities and let them coach the way they coach and see if they're getting the best out of your guys. And if you feel comfortable that your guys are staying along the values that you want to represent, and they're still doing it with their style and their flair, I think that's the best situation. I think it lets everybody get the most out of their talents.
Yeah. Well, look, you're talking about, you're being sensitive to the talent you have on your coaching staff and getting the most out of them. But you also had to be sensitive to Coach Schultz. And I read a couple articles, and you wanted to make sure people felt like you were continuing on his work. Like it wasn't going to be a new sheriff in town.
Right.
And you were very sensitive to that. Obviously, at some point, though, you're going to want to take ownership of the big picture, and you're going to have Coach Counts is going to have his own philosophy. Maybe talk a little bit about that transition and how that came.
Sure. So just a little bit back before Coach Schultz passed away, we had a season, I think maybe 2008 or I don't know, maybe 2013, 2014, we were 1-9. And it was one of those situations. We had a great group of kids. They worked hard for us. We just didn't do a good job of finishing games and winning games. We won our last game. So we were 0-9 going into our last game. We won the last game. We came back. It was at Marshall. We came back on the buses. Coach Schultz took the seniors into the locker room, and we took all the other kids into the weight room, all the underclassmen. And Coach Schultz, thanked all the seniors for everything they'd given to the program and appreciated everything, said his goodbyes to them and let them talk. And then he came into the weight room, and we basically told everybody there that, we had failed as coaches in having that commitment to the weight room and the off-season programs and the things that we needed to do to make our guys bigger and faster and stronger in the off-season to be able to compete at the level we wanted to compete. So we made a kind of a new commitment to the weight room and the conditioning, and all the coaches kind of agreed that this was something we had to do. And we made it so that the kids felt like this was something that we just had to do to be able to compete. And from that point on, I think the vision of what we wanted to be as a program and the way we wanted to play, was something that Coach Schultz and us as a coaching staff kind of laid out. So I don't think any of that has changed with his death. And that was when we talked about kind of building off of what he had put in place. Lenny went to Madison. He played college football at NC State. He was a Madison guy. He taught at Madison. Madison was kind of his vision. It was his dream job. That's where he wanted to be. And what Coach Schultz did such a great job with was, not the superstars. Coach Schultz was wonderful, like the 49th, 50th, 51st kid to be excited about being part of the program, getting kids who hadn't participated in football in the past and getting them to come out and making them feel like they were part of something, and kind of building that school and community feeling around the football team. So we wanted to keep all those things that he had kind of put in place, and then just keep pushing the bar as to what the vision that he had for this program. He had talked about us wanting to be, competing for regional championships and winning district championships and getting into state. And that stuff, we'd never been in a state final at Madison in the history of the school. And those were visions that he had. And he kind of laid out a plan for how we were going to do that. So we kept that vision, we kept that, and we just kind of built upon that. And I feel like we've done a great job kind of honoring him and the vision that he had for his program. We still talk about him. He's been gone, over 6 years now. And the kids that are in our program now were never coached by Coach Schultz, but we do kind of let them know who he was, what he believed in, what he felt about Madison football, and kind of the relationships that he had formed, and kind of the person that it made him. And I feel like we do a great job of kind of passing on his legacy to those guys. And again, I like to put my own touch on this, but I do think that the blueprint and the guideline and the philosophies of what we build our program on were kind of laid in place by Coach Schultz.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, let's talk about the last 2.5 years, because they've been crazy, because we had the COVID year where you guys played football in the early spring, late winter,
Right.
and you guys, I believe, won the region and advanced to the state playoffs.
Yes.
And then last year, won the region again, got to the state final, and then this year, obviously, won the region again, got to the state final. That's a lot of football and a lot of success in the last 2.5 years. Talk about first quickly the COVID shortened season.
Sure.
That must have been hard to pull that off, but it must have been very rewarding when you guys won the region.
Yes. Both of those are very true. Obviously, with COVID, nobody really knew what to expect. We didn't really even know if we were going to have a season. So once we got the word that we were going to play in the spring, even though it was an abbreviated season, the fact that we we're going to be able to play it all was fantastic. I think what we did a great job of at Madison, and when I say we, I'm talking about the assistant coaches, I'm talking about the players and the families, I'm talking about the administration. We really came up with a plan to be able to keep these kids involved in conditioning or weight training or whatever the county would allow at the time, as the guidelines were kind of changing and morphing. Our administration did a great job of working with us to make sure that we were able to keep the kids involved and give them something to kind of look forward to and work towards. And frankly, I think that in itself was there was a time where we would go in, the coaches would show up, we'd carry every piece of weight equipment out into the parking lot. And then we would have the kids come in shifts, 10-person shifts for 2 hours. They'd come in and they'd work out in the parking lot, and then we'd carry all the equipment back in. So our coaches made a real dedication, our trainer, our athletic director, to, we had to spray the equipment after everybody touched. There was a lot of kind of onerous things in place, but we kind of worked through that. And I think it gave our kids, number one, I think we were working when maybe some other programs weren't able to work, which kind of gave us a leg up in that regard. But I think it brought our kids together, because that was the one common thing. We weren't having any social interactions really at the time, other than being able to bring in some groups for a little bit. Even if we were distanced in the parking lot, we could at least see each other and talk and understand we were working towards something. So I feel like that was a huge advantage for us. And then when we were finally given the okay to play, everybody was so excited. And I thought we saw a huge jump in our team's performance because we were able to work so well through the kind of the COVID period. And then the following season, we returned a lot of those kids from that shortened season, and we lost in the state semifinal game to South County in a really good football game. We took the lead late, and then they went down and scored there at the end, and they won the game. So that gave us kind of that motivation that we had to get back. We returned a lot of kids from that team. So those kids were immediately right back to working, and we ended up playing again. So we ended up playing almost 25 games in that calendar year with that group of kids. And frankly, having the success of winning the region, we beat Westfield for the first time in that COVID shortened season, which for us was a huge hurdle. Westfield was the program that, we had kind of set our sights on. They were they'd won the state championship 3 times. They had run the Concord district. Everything about their program, they just kind of reloaded with talent every year. It was just a system in place. And that was kind of the goal for our program, to get to a stage where, we were reloading talent every year. We were the team that everybody wanted to beat. So we held them in the highest of esteem. And when we won that game, I'm not exaggerating, we had kids that were actually in tears. It was a regular season football game that we won. And it was just something that, we had gone up against them, for 4 or 5 years in a row, and not being able to kind of break through that hurdle. And when we finally did that, it kind of, a lot like that 4-minute mile, once it was broken, people believed that it could be done. And then we start to feel like we've reached the next level of what we're trying to accomplish as a program. So I think that once that was done, the mindset was, if we can beat Westfield, who has won state championships, we can compete at that highest level. We just need to keep pushing ourselves. So there was kind of that belief, and then the work that kind of went along with it. And we were able to win that region in that second season of 2021. And, we got to the state championship, and that was kind of an eye opener for us again as a program. Obviously, to win a state championship, you've got to be a great football team. And we ran into a great football team in Oscar Smith, but the whole pomp and circumstance of the state tournament, being able to go down the night before, staying in a hotel, kind of the walkthroughs, the stadium atmosphere, all of that was something that we had never experienced before. And I think it was just another kind of carrot to dangle in front of the kids, as this is something that we can accomplish here at Madison. We know it can be done. Now the next step for us is to kind of break through and finally win that game. But I think that experience in 2021 went such a long way in fueling this group for this season to believe that we could actually get back. We replaced a lot of really talented football players, and we had a lot of kids who had been on the team but just hadn't played a lot of football. They played a lot of football, but not meaningful Friday night football. They played on the JV, or they've kind of worked their way through the program, played at the end of games. So we had to get those guys up to speed. We felt like we had talent there, but it was unproven, and they hadn't been in kind of those environments. But the belief that we could accomplish this as a program was there. So that kind of allowed us to withstand losing our first couple of games, because we felt like we saw things that were reminiscent of what we had done the year before. We just made one too many mistakes that we could clean up, and we could correct that. There were correctable mistakes that were costing us those games, that if we tighten those things up, we learned how to practice a little bit better. We were a little bit more dedicated, that we could get to the point that we wanted to get. So having that belief in our back pocket, I think, fueled this team a lot, and it allowed us to get back to that point again this year.
Yeah. So, but by the way, I used to work for Mike Jreige. So his son, Angelo, I mean, again, the first time I've ever saw you guys play was a Yorktown game. I love the way that kid runs the football. And I understand his older brother you had him the year before. So why don't you compare those two guys as running back? Yeah.
Well, I think so. We've actually had 3 Dredges come through. Their oldest brother, Anise, played for us. He was a linebacker for us. And then Alex was a 3-year starter for us at tailback. And when I say 3-year starter, he was really the only guy we had back there, 25 carries a game, every game for 3 straight seasons. And he was a workhorse. He was a fantastic football player, a great leader, somebody that we thought was going to be irreplaceable, frankly. And Angelo, to his credit, made up his mind. He had been a fullback for us the previous year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he played fullback. He split time at fullback, and he was a little heavier, and he made up his mind that he wanted to be the tailback. And in the off season, he completely dedicated himself, changed his diet, worked on his speed, his agility, and frankly, completely changed his body to the point where when he came back, when we started fall practice, we thought, Alex was irreplaceable, but I think Angelo's gonna really push to be a similar type back. Their styles are different. Alex is a little more shifty, probably has a little bit more experience playing running back. I think Angelo is just a physical, hard running kid who just refused to be taken down by one player. I mean, there were so many times his yards after contact for us were really something that we hadn't seen before. He made his own holes. I think he helped our offensive line kind of move along and progress, whereas he did a lot of that stuff, turned a 3-yard gain into a 6-yard gain. Those little things that you don't think are that big of a deal, and they don't look that big on the score, from the stands. But when it's 2nd and 4 instead of 2nd and 7, it's a big deal. And he just did that repeatedly. And particularly when we're trying to close out games in the fourth quarter, Angelo's ability to pick up first downs when everybody knows we're running the ball was kind of the key to us kind of finishing off some games that maybe we didn't finish early in the year. But really, I'd like to say that we did some miraculous coaching to bring Angelo along, but frankly, I think it's just the work that he put in the offseason and kind of his dedication to being the best football player he could be and wanting to follow in his brother's footsteps. And I think having that kind of goal and that, someone to look up to and those shoes to fill, I think went a long way for him and certainly helped us as a football team.
He's one of the calmest running backs I've ever seen. He has the ball and he's so calm, and he gets hit, keeps playing, gets up calmly, walks back to kind of shifts back to the huddle. I mean, he's just so calm. I love watching him play. He's just
it's really funny because both of those kids, both Alex and Angelo, if you watch them in practice, you would think that they were 60-year-old men. I mean, they move so slow, look like everything hurt, all the aches and pains. it was just
Yeah.
like, and the way you described, they get tackled, they get back, they walk back to the huddle, they kind of saunter, and then they hand them the ball, and boom, it's another play. And
Yeah.
Alex was the same way. It's just, we just knew that when the lights came on, it was time to hand the ball to somebody. They wanted the ball 25 times, no matter what their body felt like Monday through Thursday. On Friday, you were going to get their best. And it's just kind of a running joke with us, if you saw those boys practice and then you saw them play, you would not believe that they're the same player. And it's not that they weren't given the effort in practice, just, they needed that time to kind of recover and do what they did. And I think they were both very good at communicating with us as to what they needed to reps wise to be ready, and then preparing their bodies to kind of for the full, 15-week season that they were going to go through.
And some athletes, they just thrive in Friday Night Lights. They love the crowds. That's the way some people do. Well, coach, so there was no panic at on the coaching staff when you lost your first 3 games. Obviously, you lost to 3 good teams. You lost to Yorktown, Stonebridge, and I believe Westfield, right?
We lost to Lake Braddock, Stonebridge, and Yorktown. To say there was no panic is probably not completely fair, but to say that we knew that everything that we wanted to accomplish in the season was still out in front of us. We knew that watching the film, that there were a lot of things that we were doing really well. And there were some things that were correctable that we weren't doing really well, that we thought that if we corrected, we could be a really good football team. So obviously nobody wants to be 0-3. I think that, we were disappointed, particularly the way we lost some of those games. I think that, particularly the Stonebridge game, who we hadn't beaten in quite some time, we felt like we had that game. We were in the driver's seat, and we kind of, to their credit, they're a championship program. They made championship plays down the end to pull that game out, but we didn't make the plays that a championship team needs to make to close that game out. And I felt like, we were able to say that it wasn't necessarily that we were getting beaten by those teams. It was that we weren't doing the things that we needed to do to finish those games and to be a championship level team that we wanted to be. So, not to take anything away from those teams, but as a coach, you've got to find, the way to spin it to your team to make them understand that, everything that we wanted was still out there, and we just needed to make some minor adjustments, and we'd point those out. And to our kids' credit, they were coachable. We showed them things that they were not doing right. And, frankly, sometimes we've showed them quite harshly, but they responded to that. They took coaching, they understood, they took responsibility, they had accountability. I think that they were really good at holding each other accountable. If we saw, there's things that we talk about all the time in our program, energy, attitude, and effort. Those are non-negotiables. Those are things that just have to be there. And the talent, you might get beat on a play, but it's not going to be because you weren't trying or you weren't giving me everything that you had. And if there were situations that we saw on film where we didn't think a kid was, pursuing a play or wasn't blocking through the whistle or whatever it was, our kids would point that out and say, this is not acceptable. This is not the way we play. This is not Madison football. And coming from a peer, it's so much more powerful than coming from a coach. And I think as coaches, we did a good job of coaching our leaders and our kids to make sure that they were in a position to feel comfortable calling their teammates out or holding each other accountable. But to the kids' credit, they were willing to do that. And the kids were, a lot of times, somebody says something to you and the reaction is, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. Instead, these guys, they were receptive, they were coachable. And I think that allowed them to continue to make improvements. And, really, the bye week for us couldn't have come at a better time for this team. We had a bye week after the Yorktown game, after our 3rd loss. And we were able to kind of take a couple of days, step back, took a couple of days off. And then when we got everybody back in, it was the pep talk of, all right, now we've used all our mistakes. We've cashed in there's no more margin for error for this season. We've got to be tight. We've got to be doing these things. And these things, when we're saying, my bad, we got to get rid of that my bad stuff. We got to get past that. We just got to make the correction, because we can't be making the same mistakes over and over. I'm fine with you making a mistake. Just don't make the same mistake over and over and over. Correct those things. We're going to make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we get better. But we can't be doing the same mistakes over and over. So our kids did a great job of responding to that. So I guess a long-winded answer to your question, I think the coaches did a real good job of kind of staying the course and preaching that everything we wanted to have was in front of us. And the kids did a great job of staying positive, continuing to understand what they need to do to get better, and understanding that everything that they wanted to accomplish was still out there for us to do.
Well, Coach, if we fast forward a little bit, you guys finally catch, you get your legs underneath you, catch fire. By the time I saw you in the Yorktown game, that was a really comprehensive win because Yorktown moves the ball, and they
Right.
really couldn't get established that game. That was a great win on a very cold night, and I believe you beat Centerville in the final. Is that correct, Coach?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then I think if you look at the scores, the way you guys play and the way Fairfax plays, I mean, they blew someone out in their regional final. So I think on paper, folks were thinking this is going to be a very tough matchup for Madison. But you guys won easily. Tell us about the Fairfax game.
Well, I don't think that we won easily. I didn't ever feel comfortable in that game until the game was over. I mean, obviously they're an extremely talented team. Those were a group of kids who had played together for quite some time. They continually gotten better year in and year out. And this year they were really putting it together. And obviously Rojas is a great football player and everybody knows that, but he wasn't the only player on that team. They had a lot of really talented kids. So I think we had a really good game plan kind of going in there. And I think, playing Centerville twice in the season and playing kind of the district schedule that we played, but Centerville specifically, we had played really athletic kids and we had played a really physical team and we had some success there. So I think we were able to hang our hat on the fact that we had played a team that we felt was I don't know if styles were completely comparable, but there were some things that they did that Fairfax did that we felt we handled pretty well when we played Centerville. We thought we had a pretty good plan going in there. And obviously, Rojas, he scored 3 touchdowns and he had probably close to 170 yards rushing, but I feel like we made him earn every one of those yards. And I think we took away some of the other things that they like to do besides him and made them a little bit one-dimensional. I think you got to give those guys a lot of credit. They fought the entire 48 minutes. I mean, it was, like I said, I didn't feel comfortable until the game was over, but I think our defense in particular really played probably their best game of the season, and we tackled really well. I mean, he's a great back, and for him in particular, you got to get him before he gets started. If he gets ahead of steam and he turns the corner, he's really tough, and we did a really good job of kind of getting him in the backfield. And even if he'd break a tackle or two, we'd have 4, 5, 6 guys on him, so we'd hold it to a 3 or 4 yard gain at the most. And I think he had a couple of long runs there, but most of his runs were 3 or 4 yards, and we were hitting him a bunch of times. And frankly, they had a bunch of guys going both ways, and we felt like if we could really make them work on defense, where we grinded out some longer drives and kind of made them play defense the whole time, and then made them work where they didn't get quick scores on offense and they had to stay out there and grind, that probably by the end of the game, we might have a slight advantage there. Really, I don't know that was the case, but I think that was something that we thought going into the game.
Yeah. Well, then you get past Fairfax and Tony Rojas, and I love watching him play basketball. I'm really sad that he's not playing basketball this year. Yeah. But then you have Freedom, who's having a historic year in terms of offensive output. Just a great team. Now, going into the game, is it a very different game for you than the Oscar Smith game was the year before? Oscar Smith was also a team loaded with Division I talent, but you guys had, you were less experienced with the big occasion at that point. So how did you feel going into the game compared to the Oscar Smith game the year before?
Yeah, I think I feel like our kids were certainly more comfortable with the environment. I think that a lot of the things that go on with the state tournament, like you said, we had a lot of kids who had done that last year, so they were familiar with kind of the way the day goes and kind of the routines. So I think from that, and also from a coach's standpoint, football, we're very oriented in our, when we come out on the field, when we do this warm up, when we do that warm up, and it allowed us to be more comfortable with the way the basic routines. As far as the game, and where we felt, I mean, obviously both of those teams presented huge challenges athletically and with their size, and we knew that they were going to be really difficult opponents. I mean, there's no question, and that's the way a state championship should be. We would have to play, a perfect game and we'd have to force them into some mistakes. I feel like Oscar Smith kind of toward the middle to end of that game just kind of overwhelmed us with their sheer size and the combination of size and speed, particularly their offense versus our defense. It was just we got a little bit overwhelmed with that. And I felt like I didn't think that was necessarily going to be the case this year. I knew that Freedom was a very physical team, but I don't know that we were just going to be absolutely manhandled. Like I felt like toward the end of that Oscar Smith game, there was a little bit of that going on. So I think, as far as us preparing, we just felt like we knew that they were a prolific offensive team, that they were going to try to score points, that they had the ability to score really from any place on the field at any time. They had 4 great wideouts, a great tailback, and a very good quarterback who could all handle the ball, could all run. And any of those guys could catch or go deep or catch a screen and take it the distance. So we knew that they were very prolific offensively. We thought we would have to control the ball. We'd have to get first downs. We'd have to stay on the field offensively. And we knew for us to win, we figured if we could score, in the low 30s, high 20s and hold them, it was going to be a tall task to hold them to that number. But that was our chance to win the game. If it was going to get into the 40s or 50s, we weren't going to have a chance to compete with that type of firepower. We just weren't going to be able to score fast enough to be able to do that. But I felt, like the kids, I don't think anybody was overwhelmed with the moment. I think that they were really into the game. I think it took us a minute. And when I say minute, probably the first couple series of the game to really get comfortable with the speed of the game. I mean, and the way that they were playing Freedom. And I saw their coach Overton, at the end of the game, made a comment. He said, it's really hard to duplicate our offense in practice. I don't think that they did anything during the game that we weren't prepared for, or we didn't expect them to do. They just did it really fast. And it was just something that we couldn't replicate in practice to get those reps. And it took us a minute to get up to speed, to how the speed of that game was going to play out.
Yeah. So, watching the game, and I probably watched more Freedom games this year than I watched high school games, over the last 15, 20 years, because I was so intrigued by them. It was the only game that I seen them play. They got the third down a lot. I mean, they had a lot of third downs they had to convert. Most of the games that I saw them play, they never even got the third down. So I thought the game was competitive in that regard. I thought the draw play you had to Jreige got you back in the game. That was a great play. It gave you some confidence. You end up scoring. Even though they came back and scored, you got to the 5-yard line. If you don't get that holding penalty, you have a real shot of going into the locker room and down a touchdown. And again, I don't think the world is not going to come to an end. I don't think the game's over, but it could have been a tremendous opportunity for you guys to get back into the game. And I felt like that happened a lot in that game. Your players made big plays, and I hadn't seen that against Freedom. Your wide receiver, I can't think of his name, made a couple of great catches. Cord Yates. I thought your tight end just made a heck of a catch and run. I thought your quarterback, Lewis, played a tremendous game compared to the competition level. Angelo was great. I mean, he was the first guy I saw really attack their defense, even though, he didn't have, I don't think he had 100 yards, but I thought he played great. But I felt like you had chances to get into the game, and I felt like the breaks didn't go your way. And the breaks would have had to go your way if you were going to get into the game. Like the flea flicker that you played that was blown dead, that was obviously it was a bad call, and that happens. Their center recovered a fumble that could have, given you some wings in your territory. And also they had the pick six that pretty much deflated you guys. So I think you guys did a great job. Your skill players made plays, which I hadn't seen against Freedom all year. But I felt like the breaks had to go your way to get into the game, and it just never happened.
Right. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think, we talk about us having to play a perfect game. I think, they got up to two scores real quick. It was 14-0. And like I talked about us trying to get up to the speed of the game. And I think it took us a minute to adjust to their speed. And then we did come back and we scored to cut it there to 14-7. We had the 4th down play that we missed by, a chain link. And, you talked about the fumble. Their kid did a great job to recover that ball. If we recover that, that's a different situation. Obviously we'd love to have gotten that touchdown on the Philly special play that would have cut it to 2 scores. And I'm not saying we would win the game, but you're right. Those are the types of plays in a game that we needed to have them turn the ball over, or force them into some turnovers that we really didn't do. They had the 1 interception right at the end of the half, but that didn't leave us enough time to really do anything. We needed to convert on that 4th down. We needed not to get the holding penalties that we got. We needed to convert every time we had a chance, because we weren't going to stop them a ton. And it was really, we needed to get a couple of stops, but we needed to match them kind of score by score. And I felt like once we didn't get we got the touchdown waved off on the Philly special play, we did get a stop on that next possession, but that's when we threw the interception that was a pick 6. And that was kind of the last gasp for us, momentum wise. We were hoping if we had been able to get that score and cut it to a 14-point game, at least we had some momentum, and they were going to have to come back down and drive it. And it was still a football game, like you said, at that point. But you got to tip your hat to those kids. People say, and I heard a lot of times, that they hadn't been punched in the mouth all year. And I still don't know that they've been punched in the mouth. I think they come out and do the punching, and that's the problem. We equated this game when we talked about it to a Mike Tyson fight. They were going to come out, and for us, we needed to withstand the first round of barrages. And if we were able to do that and get into a football game, we felt like we had a chance that maybe we could, if we push this thing far enough, that we might have a chance to get into the game. And to their credit, they came out swinging. They got the 14. We withstood that. We came back and provided a little bit, but they didn't crumble. They kept making plays, and that's a sign of a really good football team. But yeah, to your point, those little things in a football game, there's always 4 or 5 plays in a football game that determine the outcome. You play 140, 150 plays, but really 5 or 6 plays determine the game. And we needed to make those plays when we had the opportunity. And I'd say we probably made 2 out of the 6 that we needed to make. And they made 5 or 6 out of the 6 that they needed to make. And that's why they're the state champs and we're not.
Well, of course, one of the problems was you used Mike Tyson, and the kids had no idea who he was. You should have picked the Ultimate Fighter or some MMA guy. Maybe they would have caught on to that then. But
I was trying to tell them, like Mike Tyson's Punch Out, the video game. Those kids don't even know what the heck I'm talking about on that.
What is Coach talking about?
Yeah.
So Coach, last question. This has been great. What are you looking at for next year? I know you had a lot of great seniors graduate last year. I think you had 4 or 5 first team all regions that you had graduate. What about for 2023?
Well, I think we're in a very similar situation that we were coming out of the 2021 season. I think we've got a lot of kids who are on the team and in the program who just haven't had their opportunity to play on Friday night. So we're going to have some growing pains. We're going to have some development that has to happen, but I do like kind of where we are as a program. And I'm hoping that we're able to kind of replace some of those spots. Last year, we didn't have a single offensive lineman returning. We had to develop 5 new guys, and I thought that group did a good job. We had a new quarterback who I thought, far exceeded. I had high expectations for him, and I think he exceeded my expectations. We replaced the 8 guys on the defense, So, again, we're going to be in the same situation. We're replacing a lot of guys, but I think we have the pieces. I think this group has again kind of set the standard, showed these guys how it's done, what's required in the off season. They've given them the blueprint of how to be successful. It's up to our guys now to kind of take that and put that work in. We talk about how you're just not going to be good because you want to be good, or you're not just good because it says Madison on your chest. You've got to do the work that the kids before you did to have that type of success. And I think that that's been hammered home with these guys. So I'm hoping we do return some pretty talented kids. Cord Yates comes back, both of the Nicely brothers and Sonny Endicott. So most of our skill guys on offense. And then we've got a couple of linebackers who got injured who will be returning. And we've got a couple other kids on the defensive side that we have really high hopes for, high expectations for. And I think we've got great leadership. So I'm hoping that Madison football is sticking around for a little bit. Like I said, we'll have to replace some really talented kids, some great kids, great leaders. But I think we've got the pieces in the building. They just got to do the work to get to that point.
Yeah. Well, Coach, well, look, congratulations on a great season. I really enjoyed your effort in the state final. I mean, anyone who saw that game knew it was a battle. The final score didn't look great, but it was a great game. You guys came to play. You made some great plays. You lost to an historic team, but it's definitely something to build on. I'd love to meet you in person. Maybe next year I can come to a game or practice and shake hands with a fellow UVA grad. But you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Sure, Julian, and I certainly appreciate all you're doing to promote high school sports in this area. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great, Coach. Look, have a great off season and a great holiday, and hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, Coach.